Today is Thursday, February 23. I'm Pastor Anthony, and this is Wilderness Wanderings. Today our text comes from Deuteronomy 2. And the Lord said, "Now get up and cross the Zered Valley." So we crossed the valley. 38 years passed from the time we left Kadesh Barnea until we crossed the Zered Valley. By then, that entire generation of fighting men had perished from the camp, as the Lord had sworn to them. The Lord's hand was against them until he had completely eliminated them from the camp. Now when the last of these fighting men among the people had died, the Lord said to me, "Today you are to pass by the region of Moab at Ar." That's Deuteronomy 2, verses 13 to 18. In the land of Esau, the last of Jacob's unfaithful descendants die. That's where this passage takes place, south of Moab, which is in the land of Edom. Does the text mean to recall more through this geographical point of interest? I think it does. If you recall from the story in Genesis 32 and 33, Jacob is filled with great fear and distress at the prospect of meeting his brother Esau again after so many years in exile with his uncle Laban. Jacob wrestles alone all that night with a man who he later understands to have been God. In some way, this is a story of Jacob's fear, wrestling with a God who proves to be for Jacob, not against him. Jacob had a hard time believing that God could really be faithful to his promise of establishing Jacob in the promised land, though, given the frightful prospect of Esau and his 400 men. And so, Jacob's fear wrestles against the promises of God till daybreak, where he is given the name Israel, the one who wrestles with God. As it turns out, Jacob's desire for blessing proves stronger than his fear. He survives the encounter and lives, though not without a God-induced limp, to humble him and remind him that he always lives by God's saving and not his own. Our present story in Deuteronomy is similar. It is in the land of Esau, south of the Zered Valley, where Israel once again becomes Israel. For a 38-year-long night, their fears have caused them to disbelievingly wrestle with God's promises. At the end of this long night, their desire for blessing wins out, and they are still alive, but not without a significant limp. All of the fearful fighting men have died, and Israel is reminded that they live by God's promises, God's provision, and God's saving, not their own. It's worth noting that this is the first holy war described in the book of Deuteronomy. The Lord's hand was against them until he had completely eliminated them, the text says. This language is the same as in other God-directed military campaigns that Israel will undertake. It is important to remember, therefore, that the first holy war is not against the enemies of Israel, but is waged within Israel itself. Fear had to die out of the camp before Israel could trustingly receive the promise of God's victory. The promise given to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob could only be received by a people of Abraham's faith, who were willing to go on nothing more than the word of God, trusting that whatever was needful would be given by God. Or perhaps more accurately, a people of Jacob's limping faith, that through wrestling with fear and doubt would have to discover again and again that God's blessing was worth pursuing, and that God was faithful to his promise, and that anyway God was the only hope for salvation that they had. This language of fear versus faith and fear versus love will show up again and again in the Bible. It's at the heart of the account of Saul versus David that we've just finished off. Read through 1 Samuel 18. The passage is just dripping with the contrast between the fear encircling Saul and the love buoying up David in the promises of God. Or again in the New Testament, go back to the passages cited by Pastor Michael yesterday, like that from 1 John 4, which says, "There is no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear." This dynamic shows up in our own hearts still today. So take time to examine. What fears live in your own heart that cause you to wrestle with the promises of God rather than receiving them? We tritely and simply accuse others that we disagree with these days of being fearful, particularly when it comes to the culture war battles being fought within the church. The accusation may very well be correct. But remember, the first holy war is fought within, not without. Before we can go crusading against the world, we have to wrestle through the fears of our own hearts. Having done so, we may just find that there's actually no battle to be fought at all on the other side, just gifts to be trustingly received from the God of promise and blessing, who saves us still. As you journey on, go with the blessing of this God. May the peace of the Lord Christ go with you, wherever he may send you. May he guide you through the wilderness and protect you through the storm. May he bring you home rejoicing at the wonders he has shown you. And may he bring you home rejoicing once again into our doors.